I'm Doug Page, and today I'm speaking with Diane Francis, a Canadian writer and journalist who about 12 years ago wrote a book called Merger of the Century, Why America and Canada Should Become One Country. This is a copy of the book. It's a really fascinating read, and I really recommend that you buy it. Given that the President Trump has talked about making Canada the 51st state, I'm very grateful that Ms. Francis could spend some time with me today. Thank you so much.
Wow.
Um, if you don't know, the United States and Canada share the world's largest undefended border. In U.S. terms, that's about 5,500 miles. In metric terms, that's about 9,000 kilometers, or 900 kilometers. Um, and by all appearances, there don't seem to be too many issues between the northern border with the United States and Canada like there are with the southern border with Mexico. Many Canadians have made their way to the United States to seek their fame and fortune. They include people like Jim Carrey, Martin Short, Mike Myers, to name a few. They also include people like Alexander Graham Bell, started the telephone. He went to Scotland or started life in Scotland before heading to Canada and then to the United States. And then, of course, there's William Ford, who started life in Ireland before going to Montreal, moving to Michigan, and becoming the father of Henry Ford. The rest is history there. One of the great success stories in reverse, where someone went from the United States to Canada to seek their fortune, might be Michael Budman and Don Green. They created this very successful store called Roots in Canada, which has done quite well for itself. They have some outlets, I believe, in the United States, or did at least at one point. And then, of course, there is my guest, Diane Francis, who started life in Chicago, in Skokie, in fact. Diane, thank you so very, very much for being with me today. Question for you. Justin Trudeau is announced that he is going to leave the premiership of Canada. What should Americans think of him? How does he rate in terms of being a prime minister in Canada or anything like that? How does he stack up? And I ask this question because, as you know all too well, Americans really don't think about Canada unless it probably involves hockey or baseball. Otherwise, it probably doesn't occupy a whole lot of spots in their brain.
Yeah, because unlike Mexico, we're not a problem.
There you go.
Yeah, the Trudeau is a Nepo baby. His father had been prime minister,
Right.
and he's a good-looking guy. His mother was beautiful, so he was essentially elected without any credentials. He was a celebrity kind of kid, and he never had a job that we know of. He ran for office briefly before becoming leader and then prime minister. We don't know if he has any degrees. There's a whole big dark piece of his biography that we knew very little about. So I always like to jokingly say he got elected because of his daddy's name and his mommy's looks. And he's not very astute, shall we put it that way. So for 10 years, he's governed as prime minister, even though he only got 30% of the popular vote in all the elections, because he made a coalition with the Socialist Party and has taken the government in a woke, ultra left-wing direction, and not enhanced the country in any way. He has reduced its living standard. Our per capita income has gone down in 10 years under his ruling, and he has hurt natural resource extraction, which is the basis of our wealth. He's hurt our economy. He's opened the floodgates to questionable immigration. Numbers are horrific, and there was no screening, and now we have a crime problem and so on. And I don't think he's done one darn thing right. And our reputation has fallen internationally, and our military has been completely neglected to the point of really not almost existing. And so, all of these things were things that I warned we shouldn't be doing when I wrote this book. And I said the merger of the century was going to happen because Canadians aren't doing it, and they better do it. And if they don't do it, they will have to merge. They will be forced to merge with the United States. So we're at this point now.
So you really think you're at a point here where it's either for Canada to survive as some kind of political entity, that it's got to have a merger with the United States?
Well, we already are partnered. Let me put it that way,
Sure.
Economically and sociologically. I mean, Canadians and Americans live in each other's countries. They intermarry. They send their children to each other's schools. It's all very jolly and friendly. And we have a free trade deal, or we did. So that facilitated economic growth, mutually beneficial on both sides of the border. Now we are facing a situation where our neglect of our military has really gotten under Trump's skin, and I think it should. We've been freeloading, and also his failure to have decent security and policies in the country and controls over immigration has resulted in drug smuggling and illegal migrants from Canada going up.
Sorry. Well, that's really fascinating that is going on because I mean, when you think about the United States and Canada, it would just seem that nobody would ever think that a country would ignore its own borders. Certainly, it's certainly the northern border too, as well, the Arctic. But that's the one that keeps coming up: is that the Arctic really is an issue with the United States or with Canada, I should say.
Well, it's a national security issue. I mean, there's nothing up there. Canada's done absolutely nothing about it,
Right,
has developed it. There's oil up there. They decided not to use it because they had a green government elected. Oh no, we don't drill
right,
uh, for oil. Excuse me. I think there's about 300 soldiers up there. It's
yeah,
bigger than Western Europe. It's
yeah,
just sitting up there. And of course, the Chinese are sniffing around and the Russians are sniffing around. And, this is upsetting. And the same applies maybe to Greenland.
right.
Although I think that Canada is a little more closer to home for the United States. So what triggered this crisis now? I call it a crisis. It's a crisis in Canadian terms right now, where we are at with Trump threatening us with 25% tariffs, which would plunge us into a deep recession
Right.
and create financial problems for everybody. What's gotten us here is this neglect of our security, immigration, perimeters, borders, military. And Trump got very upset because there were illegal migrants and fentanyl coming in from Canada. Had been all along, but increasing. And so he just blew a gasket and said, we're going to slap tariffs on you just like Mexico because you guys aren't doing your jobs. And he wasn't wrong.
Right, right. That's fascinating. You know, it's sort of an interesting thing you talk about that because I had come across a Canadian broadcasting story from May of last year, and I was a bit taken aback by this. I just didn't, think about these numbers, but it said that 126,000 Canadians left Canada alone for the United States in 2022. And it seemed to suggest that there were more than that in previous years too, as well. And what was interesting too is that the great motivation to leave, based on this story, was Justin Trudeau, crime, and the cost of housing. What is going on with the cost of housing in Canada? Because it's a big story here in the United States, obviously too.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain, but we've had a deluge of migrants, mostly coming in as foreign students,
Right.
and the government didn't check whether the schools they said they were coming here to attend existed or not.
Hmm.
So this gigantic scam was perpetrated
Right.
on the people of Canada because of an inept government run by Trudeau and his immigration system.
Right.
And we have something in the order of 3 million unaccounted for young men who allegedly are here to go to school. And they don't spread across the country. They go to Vancouver and Toronto. That's where they go.
Really?
And we have enormous housing prices in both those cities. Our crime rates in both those cities are through the roof.
Hmm.
They hijack cars because they don't have employment. They never get deported. They don't attend the school.
Yeah.
And they live in gangs, and it's a real problem. There's gun violence. They get guns from the US. And I think they're going down and they're doing some shenanigans down there. Many of them live along the border.
Hmm.
So this is a policing problem that Canada created and isn't doing enough about. And the other problem that it's created is not only these excessive housing prices, bringing millions of people in without having a place for them to live, is that they all get free health cards. So our healthcare systems are overwhelmed. It takes 6 months to get a doctor's appointment now. It's a nightmare. And this is created by Mr. Trudeau.
Wow. Wow. Who, given the fact that he's announced he's going to leave office, I guess sometime in March, if I'm correct, who is likely to succeed him? Who do you think?
One of the members of his clown car, are going to take over the party leadership, and then they have to call an election. Look, it's worse than that, Doug.
Yeah.
He just quit.
Yeah.
Who does that? We have a crisis. We have a president of the United States who's threatening to plunge us into a deep recession, who's furious at us because of our incompetence, who tells us that we didn't do enough at the border and there's border problems. And he quits on us. He just resigns. And then he says there will have to be a convention of his party to elect a leader. And so we're not even going to have an election until 6 months from now. You do not leave a country adrift in the middle of a crisis. You know, even if you create it yourself, you appoint somebody else who knows what they're doing, but you don't just up and leave. And that's what he's done. So it just shows you the measure of the man. He's immature and he's without any morality as a leader.
So I want to go back to this because I'm not I don't follow Canadian politics that much. I have obviously been reading it obviously quite a bit, but question for you. So when he says he quit, I mean, is there nobody sitting there in the prime minister's office at all? I mean, is there nobody there today? He's gone off somewhere else. He's hung out the vacant sign. He's hanging wherever he's hanging. I mean, if
it's hard for Americans to understand. It's the parliamentary system.
right,
So it works that the party that got that won the most seats to the parliament, their leader becomes the prime minister.
sure,
There's no succession. There's no vice president.
right,
There's no, next in line succession.
yeah,
So when he leaves, only he can call an election.
right,
And so he's not calling an election to give his party time to find somebody. And also, he also suspended the business of Parliament. So he can't even be officially kicked out and an election started by all the other parties that outnumber him collectively in the Parliament. It's called proroguing. So he's absolutely frozen the Parliament from the legislatures. That's like telling Congress they can't do anything for 6 months. I mean, it's beyond belief. And because he's the only one that can declare an election, there isn't going to be one until the new leader, and then he or she is going to take their time. Now, legally, there's a limit, and that's October. But this country we're going to be plunged into a very serious economic and other kinds of crises, being leaderless for months,
right,
with a very important negotiation with Trump.
sure. And does this then mean if you have a parliament that's not working or has been closed up for the time being, that really the governing would then fall to the various governors of the various provinces and territories in Canada? I mean, would they sort of be, for lack of a better option, do they become the ones who are in charge?
Well, they're becoming outspoken and they're going down to Mar-a-Lago and so on. The premiers are very powerful and they're all very competent. But, as the system exists, he has shut down legislation that would have kicked him out of office had it been allowed to be open, but he didn't want to be kicked out. So he's resigned. He's not doing a lick of work. His party is futzing around trying to find a leader, none of whom will be any more competent than him. And then they will decide when to call an election. Yeah. And that won't be earlier than June. I mean, you do not, that's like a captain letting his ship go adrift. Right. That's what he's done. It's really unprecedented. And it's the measure of the man, the spoiled brat who became a prime minister.
Yeah. It sounds like it too as well. Back in the early 1990s, you wrote a book called A Matter of Survival, Canada in the 21st Century. I've not read the book, but can you tell us a little bit more about it? And was it part of your evolution toward writing the book Merger of the Century?
Well, A Matter of Survival was more about the general global geopolitical threats that face Canada and everybody.
Okay.
Oh, that was the Russia stuff, the India stuff, the Middle Eastern stuff. And so that was a little bit more international. But merger came about because being American and Canadian, I kind of saw how these two countries, I mean, I really understand their cultures. They are different. Yep. They're not hugely different, but they're different. Yep. And of course, their systems of government and the type of leaders they have are different. And I just knew that it wasn't fair for Canadians to freeload off American military protection. And so also, it was not a good idea to be as dependent as we were becoming economically and trade-wise with the Americans, if you wanted to be a freestanding country. And so I just said, don't want to do those things? Talk about a full or partial merger. I think what would work best is a European Union type economic union.
Gotcha.
Because politics are too different.
Right.
It would be too difficult to do that. But I think the Europeans have found a way to keep their cultures, keep their political systems, but do business nicely with one another. And of course, they're also wrestling with the problem of security. They don't have sufficient security. They've also relied on the United States too much for it.
Right, right. Yeah, it would seem on the political front when you think about turning Canada into the 51st state, however, putting aside how palatable that idea is, it would seem that given the fact that Canada seems to lean a little bit more to the left than the United States does, that it would be hard to find a few Republican senators or enough Republican senators to sign off on turning Canada into the 51st state. I mean, I can't imagine.
If they two were merged, there'd never be a Republican president again.
Yeah, yeah.
Canadians, that would be, 40 million Democrats. But one of the things I wanted to also mention was that, I also did in my book, Merger of the Century, I did with an investment banker. I sat down and I said, okay, what would this look like if they were two corporations? One big, one little. How does that work? Who gets compensated? How are they paid off? And I did this model, and it's absolutely fascinating. So what we did was we added up the natural resource wealth of each country. We're talking forests, fresh water, arable land, metals and minerals, oil. Canada is $17 trillion richer than the United States. So to call us a 51st state is beyond insulting. It's actually very stupid. Canada is richer than the United States in natural assets and resources. It's also geographically bigger. It's bigger than the 50 states. So to talk about a 51st state is rooted either in stupidity, but whether it's stupid or not, it's very insulting and it's very inappropriate. This is a hugely wealthy country.
Understood, and it was interesting about your book too, as well. That you go through the five ways that Canada, the United States could merge. You talk certainly about the mineral wealth too, as well. But it's also interesting that U.S. GDP comes in at about $27 trillion, and Canadian GDP comes in at about $2.1 trillion, which you mentioned as one of the reasons to merge, because certainly it gives a combined entity a serious leg up on those who seem to be opposed to both of our countries, Canada or Russia and certainly China. So there is that reason too as well. And compare that to China's 18 trillion and Russia's $2 trillion in their GDP. But I guess the economic union would certainly, I think, be much more palatable. I mean, it would seem to me I don't know enough about the politics, but that would be a better idea than trying to have a political entity too as well.
Yeah, you go to a customs union and then a monetary union.
Right.
That's what the Europeans did. It took them about 20 years to do it.
Right.
It was gradual, but it wasn't violent. It wasn't, a virulent debate all the time. It was just a lot of nitpicking and bureaucracy. But combined, the two countries would be the superpower of all time.
Right. That's true. The economic merger, the GDP between both countries, is that the best region? Is that the single best reason that you think for both countries to combine, because it would provide such an economic powerhouse that really could not be challenged by anybody else?
No, I think there were other reasons, and one of them were the fact that we aren't pulling our weight militarily to protect ourselves, and that we had to pony up voluntarily, or they would get fed up with it. And I said in the book back in 2013, the Americans are not going to put up with paying for our defense forever. And of course, Trump is the first one to call us out on it. The second thing is that Canada has a very difficult time because we're kind of the Austria to Germany or the New Zealand to Australia. We're the farm team. We're the farm team. My opening chapter, as you mentioned some of them, the movie stars, the tycoons, the contribution that Canadians have made because they go to the US, because it's a bigger, more dynamic economy. There's greater opportunities. And so you train and educate these people and you lose them. So Canada has never been able to get its footing, perhaps, as if it might have had it been completely isolated as a country on its own. So, that's another reason why the merger made a lot of sense. In the 19th century, the figures are that as many Canadians immigrated to the United States as were in the country at the beginning of that century.
Right.
The whole bunch went.
The whole bunch went. Yeah. Yeah.
Including Walter Chrysler's father, including Thomas Edison's father, including Henry Ford's father, including Will Durant, who started General Motors. I mean, it just goes on and on. And so, that's being a farm team is fine if you like it that way, but the Americans are just not going to put up with the military problem and the other and the border problem.
And then what is the allure? If you grow up in Canada and you decide to move to the United States, whether you were doing it back, let's say, 100 years ago, or you're doing it, today. But what is really what do you see in the United States that you don't see in your own country?
Well, Canada is a lot different than it is now, and everything's quite internationalized. So, but you got to remember that Canada was really an agrarian nation until the Second World War.
Okay.
It was mostly agrarian. So we're talking about like a Nebraska or a Kansas. Well, why do kids in Nebraska and Kansas go to New York or LA?
Sure.
Because that's where the glam jobs are, or certain specialties are, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, or for climate. And so, there's an allure, and it's always been a richer country. So the living standards are higher, taxes are lower, the living standards are higher, the pay's higher. There were a zillion different reasons, but it was mostly because it was an agrarian-based economy until the Second World War.
Gotcha. Okay, understood. Donald Trump obviously has made many comments about the NATO countries increasing their defense spending. He did this during his first term. He certainly has been on that case recently too, as well. There seems to be this reluctance in Canada, as you mentioned, about meeting the 2% target rate when it comes to NATO spending or defense spending for NATO. What is this? I mean, can you explain the United States, obviously, has got this military-industrial complex. It's been around for a number of decades. In World War II, Pearl Harbor will never happen again, as far as the Joint Chiefs of Staff go in the United States, or at least they're going to try not to make that happen. But there seems to be this reluctance in Canada about military spending. I don't think this is. I don't know if you can lay this all on Justin Trudeau. Maybe you can. But how does this? What is going on with this idea?
Well, I've been writing articles forever about, I get leaks from the military about how the equipment is falling apart and rusting and they can't recruit people. And, I mean, and my opinion's always been, you got to pull your weight. We're in NATO. We have never met our 2%. And a year ago, I think Trudeau went down to the Washington Post and said, Canada's not going to meet the 2% ever.
Yeah.
Just said that. And, that's just so, it's insensitive. And, it's obviously wrong in an increasingly dangerous world. So I think that Canadians and their leaders would rather have, if bottom line is, if you can get away with it, do it.
Right.
Seriously. So, but my point was, we're getting away with it now. We're not going to get away with it forever because the Americans are going to smarten up. It's costing them billions to help us.
Yeah. So
they smartened up. But up until that point, who cares about a military? We all knew the Americans wouldn't let anybody invade us. And secondly, we wanted universal daycare and dental care. And we have it. We have a great healthcare system and you don't, because you spend so much on military. So what I'm saying is that, we were, I don't want to use the expression, but you know what the expression is.
Well,
consciously, but unconsciously, they'll take care of it.
No, they'll take care of it.
In fact, I even warned in a column a couple of years ago. I said, guys, if we don't do this, if we don't pull our weight, they're going to start to send us invoices, and they're going to be big ones. So there goes teeth. Forget the universal dental. Never did. Mr. Trump is doing it now, and I don't blame him.
Yeah. Well, he's got plenty of reasons to go off and make that case. It would seem, Let me ask you this. I mean, Do and
Right. The military bill that the Americans are paying for the whole world is just not fair. And that's got to stop. And he's right on that.
Yeah, well, we've got our ships all around the world. I mean, they've been certainly in the Middle East lately, in the Red Sea, and certainly they're certainly off the coast of Taiwan and the South China Sea too, as well. Because there are lots of potential issues there too. So there certainly is. It's a United States military that certainly is stretched at times to the limit. It appears for the foreseeable future that it will be too as well. Let me ask you this. I mean, when you think about this merger idea or some sort of political, or I guess economic union, um, how would that play in Canada? I mean, would Canadians be okay with something like that idea? I mean, in some ways, we're the bigger of the two brothers. I mean, would that I guess is there an emotional attachment that Canadians have with Canada that something like this, an economic union, would disrupt them, or they would be upset about, or would they be totally okay with it? I mean, how do you think this would?
An economic union is not a problem.
Yeah,
A full-blown political union is going to get people's backs up because we really don't want your gun laws and your healthcare system. They're both ridiculous.
fair.
And so we don't want that kind of society. And you can't barricade yourself against that if you're in political union. And so that would be the problem. But an economic union, absolutely no problem at all. And by the way, I said in this book that the merger would happen if we don't pull our weight militarily because the Americans would be tired of it or there's a crisis. And I also said that, Canadians will be asking for any kind of merger if there's a crisis. And so we may see that happen if we end up with a real crisis. I hope not, because that will really affect the US too.
So, under a very worst case scenario, you could see a day potentially where the Prime Minister of Canada, whoever the Prime Minister could be, burning a hotline down to the President of the United States, whoever the President of the United States might be, and saying, "We've got to figure this out. We've got to figure out a way to merge because I don't have any other choices."
Yeah, let's do an economic union.
Yeah,
We've got all these phenomenal resources,
right,
and this is the way do a referendum,
right, right.
and away you go. I mean, there should be. I'm not saying that's going to happen or needs to happen. The economic union is just a plain good idea, but I don't think a political union or a big merger is in the cards yet, unless there's a crisis in Canada, and I hope not. But
Yeah, yeah.
5% tariffs are going to sink us.
Yeah, there's a huge issue with the tariffs because, of course, you've got, Canada and the United States really are in many ways the two largest trading partners for each both countries.
Yes.
And the tariffs would seem to be, if Trump is actually serious about this, could potentially impact, a lot of jobs.
Yeah, and the other thing that's quite ironic and funny is that, Americans are the biggest investors in Canada, and Canadians are among the biggest foreign investors in the US, mostly just real estate. They buy Florida and California and Palm Springs, Arizona, uh, for winter residences. But no, there's a lot of investment both sides of the border. The two biggest exports from Canada to the US are the car and car parts industry and oil.
Right, right. I think we've got about 80% of your oil, if I'm correct. I think Canada produces about 5.6 million barrels of oil a day, and I think it's about
It's more than Iran and Iraq, and you take it all that
yeah,
we export, just about all of it, and it's about 50% of your oil. So
right,
when America brags about being the biggest oil producer in the world, half that stuff is Canadian.
right,
So here's the point, though. The oil in the ground is owned by the people of the country in Canada. That's how our system works. The
right.
Crown owns the subsurface mineral rights. But the people that developed it and built the pipelines and so on are mostly American.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
And same with the car industry. So if he slaps tariffs on oil and cars as well as everything else, he's going to be shooting his own American shareholders and owners and pipeline owners in the foot.
Right, right. There's also an issue of rare earths, which have been used for a lot of defense spending or defense, actually, products, missiles, guns, so forth and so on. And, China had been, a big supplier of rare earths But if I'm understanding this correctly, Canada is also a potential supplier of rare earths too, as well. Am I correct about that?
Huge. Ontario has it just about 6 hours drive north of Toronto is one of the biggest areas of rare earths. Alberta not only has oil and natural gas, it has lithium, probably more lithium than anywhere in the world. And then you've got Saskatchewan, which has oil and it has more uranium than any country in the world except Kazakhstan. And it supplies about a quarter of all the uranium to the US. So, it's really it's really quite a wealthy country.
Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating. When you think about, you talked about this a little bit, but the differences between sort of the Canadian personality versus the American personality. This is it's a fascinating topic. I've traveled overseas, been in the pubs in London and the bars and the cafes in France and in Germany, and you sort of we all sort of get in this conversation. Obviously, anytime you travel overseas, oh, you Americans, and what we do and what we do wrong. But what is, when you think about the distinguishable differences between the Canadian personality and the American personality, how would you describe it?
Well, I actually looked at it in the first chapter of the book, and I said, growing up in the US Midwest,
Yeah,
it's most of the people were Germanic. The people, same in California, same in Texas, same in Pennsylvania. It's not Dutch, it's Deutsch.
yeah,
And so I sort of looked at the census, the most recent American US Census, where they ask you your origin.
right.
And 60% of white Americans said they were German, not part German, not Irish, not Polish, German. 60%. Then I looked at all the presidents of the United States, and just about every one of them was either Germanic completely, like Trump is half German, or Obama, a quarter German. Nixon was, Eisenhower, of course. And so, okay, what does that mean? Now, compared to Canada, it was the founding people are British or French.
Yeah,
And so they have a different sensibility. Manners are very important. Germans are good at metal bashing. They have the best work ethic in the world, and they're very blunt.
yeah.
Canadians are not blunt. Work ethic, not particularly geniuses at technology, science, and engineering.
Right.
So it's a little bit, it's certainly a generalization, but I think that the social mores, the social behavior of Americans is more Germanic than the polite British behavior. And so that can grate people the wrong way. And I say, tough luck. So that's who we are. Really, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a matter of style. But
Right.
it also has, I think the German influence in the United States has been much bigger than a lot of people realize. And a lot of people changed their names after each war. And I would say that most of the Silicon Valley guys are German
Yeah,
background.
yeah. Americans are much more sort of in your face and just louder too as
Blunt,
well. Uh,
blunt. Yeah.
yeah, blunt and loud. I mean, I experienced that when I was a student in France during college. I mean, you could sort of tell it was easy to sort of spot the Americans a mile away, if you will.
Yeah, I can go into a restaurant with a bag over my head and I can pick out the Americans at the table because they talk too loud
Right.
all the time.
All the time. That's right. Exactly. There's also an issue which I think you discussed in your book too as well. You talk about the birth rate between the United States and Canada. I mean, they're both pretty low. How does this get resolved too as well? Because if you don't have enough people to replace you, of course, social programs get to be hard to fund. Because you lack the taxes, too as well, because there are less people and all that kind of thing. Is there any way to reverse that in both countries too at all? Any ideas?
I don't think it's a good idea. I'm not a big fan of birth rates
Yeah,
going up. The world is burning up to a cinder because there's too many human beings and we use too much of everything.
right.
We're destroying animal species, we're fishing out the oceans, we ruin the soil, I mean, the whole thing is overpopulation. And so my understanding is that the global population and population growth is directly related to the degree of education of the females in your society. The more educated females, the fewer children they have because they're smart. And so what you basically have to do is just level it off. And never mind, we're not going to run out of, we're going to have humanoids and robots to do a lot of this stuff, and AI is going to replace a lot of jobs. So I really think that people aren't going to be, I'm not saying that they're going to become surplus, but this business of population thing, I mean, it sounds very Hitler to me. It sounds very Elon Musk, and I don't get it because it's not a good idea to me. I think the world environmentally, and I'm not a big greenie, but environmentally, we have to know the degradation is there and fires or whatever. And, we can't keep replicating. We just can't. So the numbers I see, the big picture numbers, is that the population of the globe is going to level off at about 2060 and then gradually go down. And I think that's a good thing.
Fascinating, fascinating. It's interesting. That's fascinating thing. Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, and all that kind of thing. Who are the, let's sort of last question, but who are the sort of the primary candidates then to potentially replace Justin Trudeau? I've heard Mark Carney's name get kicked around. What about the conservative, the leader of the Conservative Party, who's is a Pierre Poilievre? Is that how you pronounce his name?
Polyev or Polyev.
Poilievre.
I know him personally. He's a good guy. I know the guys around him. He comes out of the Conservative Party tradition. Stephen Harper was our prime minister, and the guys that and Stephen Harper are around him. He's smart. He's very presentable. He gets business and economics.
Right.
He's not going to go rogue. So he would be fine. And if there's an election tomorrow, he wins by a landslide. As far as the Liberals, all the ones that have raised their heads, including Mr. Carney, are, I think, in everybody's minds, accomplices to the mess that they've created in 10 years. They've all been accomplices. Carney was their economic advisor, and he did a bad job. And everybody else was in the cabinet of Trudeau who didn't belong in the cabinet. He didn't have one person with domain expertise holding a portfolio in that government.
Really. And it was interesting too. Mark Carney not only headed up the Bank of Canada, but at one point he headed up the Bank of England too, as well. Am I correct?
Yes, and he's a big deal with Brookfield, which is a gigantic Canadian development and energy company, big conglomerate, and he's in charge of their greeny stuff, climate change stuff, and the last thing we need is another person going off half-cocked. Canada's wealth is based on the extraction of natural resources and oil. And you know what? We have never had anything to be ashamed of environmentally. We make them clean up. We are, we're getting down to net zero emissions. So, to do that is actually economic suicide. And so, and Carney has conflicts of interest too, vis-a-vis Brookfield. They do a lot of business with the federal government. I don't want him anywhere near it.
Yeah, gotcha. If the United States were to have some sort of relationship or a strong relationship with Greenland, I mean, and I've seen this too as well, where you've got, Alaska on one side and let's say some sort of U.S. Greenland sort of thing on the other side, if you will, east and west. I mean, how would Canadians think about that? Would they begin to feel surrounded by the United States? Because here we are on the southern border, there we are in Alaska, and there we are in Greenland too as well. I mean, I'd probably a crazy idea, but I get paid to ask crazy questions and dumb questions, so here I am asking.
Yeah, no, I don't know. It's not, remember, it's interesting you ask that question because it's because you're American.
Right.
Canadians don't think of a Canadian world order. They're just a country, they do their thing.
Sure.
Okay, Americans say, well, I'm surrounded here and I'm surrounded when we have to control everything, and the world order is Western and it's ours. And that's why you have troops everywhere. The Canadians don't. So that wouldn't be anything. They wouldn't feel surrounded. They like Americans and vice versa. I mean, if they could do business and travel together and have a house in Florida or apartment in California, whatever, that's what they want. The other thing is that it's a very interesting country. It is, I would say 90% of it is inhospitable. It is so cold and remote. And great parts of it are desert. The Arctic is mostly a desert. There's no trees up there and no topsoil. And so, the country is a ribbon of 8 cities that are clustered along the US border.
Sure.
And a person in Toronto has more in common with someone in New York than they do with someone in Vancouver. So it's north-south orientation, and that's the social networking, and the business deals are done north-south. So it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then, any given time you're driving on I-95 in the United States, heading down to Florida or going up north, I mean, you often see, Canadian license plates. I mean, from Ontario or Quebec. I mean, they're many, many times. You do see that. So you certainly do see a lot of Canadians coming into the United States all the time to be here.
Look, we have a lousy climate. I mean, why not? And Canadians are pretty well off. I mean, we have a prosperous country.
Sure, sure, sure. Well, Diane, thank you so very, very much for your time today. I am so very, very grateful that you could make time for this interview and to talk with you and to learn more about Canada. This has been a great tutorial for me. And I'm sure it's a great tutorial for the people who watch this too as well. Thank you so very, very much. And we certainly do hope, I certainly do hope, that you will come back when you publish your next book. And I certainly have enjoyed reading your columns in the Financial Post too as well.
Great. I'm a bestseller on Substack. I write about geopolitics.
I have a subscription.
Great. And the last time I looked, there were 400,000 Canadians living in the LA, Southern California area. 400,000 of us.
Yeah, that will be interesting to sort of see what happens with those fires. I've been telling people I think that could prompt a real sea change in California politics.
I think people will relocate and not go back. I have a son-in-law that lost his house in the Palisades. Yeah. And they're not sure they want to go back. Look, it's fire prone. It's going to happen again. That's what I would be thinking.
Right.
But California is a lovely place and climate, and he's connected in the Hollywood world. But you can work remotely from anywhere. So I think a lot of people are going through that exercise.
Yeah, yeah. I learned that a great restaurant it was good for the food, but what really made it a selling point was its location. It was a restaurant called Moon Shadows. It was in Malibu, right on the water. In fact, the waves would come underneath part of the restaurant, part of the building.
Wow.
Moon Shadows was basically a fish house, and it got some press a number of years ago when Mel Gibson had his inebriated rant. I don't know why. If you think about all the places you can go pick to have one, why would you go there? But he did. Maybe it was the view. But it's a tragedy that place also got burned down too as well. So it's more on that.
It's a gigantic community. It's a gigantic subculture and community. It's gigantic.
It really is. It really is. Yeah, it's
maybe forever.
Maybe forever.
They'll go to Seattle or somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, that's a story that is not finished. When the embers are simmering or smoking, that story is it's going to be a long time before that story comes to an end. Certainly, there's more to be done there. Well, again, Diane, thank you so very, very much. I'm grateful for your time. I really do hope you come back when you write your next book. And I so very much enjoyed meeting you and talking to you. Thank you so very, very much.
Send me a link so I can share.
Absolutely, I will do that. Thank you.
Bye-bye.